For Antiwar.com and Chaos Radio 95.9 FM in Austin, Texas, I'm Scott Horton, and this is Antiwar Radio. All right, very special guest today on Antiwar Radio, Dr. Ron Paul, Congressman representing District 14 in South Texas, and new presidential candidate, although that's all I can say about that because Antiwar.com is a nonprofit and the government has rules about such things. But we can talk all about what Dr. Ron Paul believes, and that's really what I'm interested in anyway. So welcome back to the show, Dr. Paul.
Thank you, Scott. Good to be with you.
You have the most consistent anti-war record of any congressman from either party. If one goes back and reads your speeches from years and years ago, they're just the same as the ones today, taking the strict anti-war position. This is obviously due to the fact that you have some very strong principles about such things. So, Dr. Paul, what are your first principles of American foreign policy?
Well, first, I think it's in our best interest to mind our own business, provide for a strong national defense, and to stay out of the affairs of other nations. I don't believe in internationalism of the sort where we go to war under the United Nations. So those are my personal beliefs. But at the same time, the most important promise I make is the promise to uphold the Constitution. If you read the Constitution carefully, we find out that there is no authority to do those things. So I personally abhor getting involved when we don't need to be, and getting in wars that are unnecessary. At the same time, we're told that we're not allowed unless there's an explicit declaration of war. And since World War II, we've totally ignored those guidelines.
And now I think probably the mainstream policy establishment would say that that makes you an isolationist then. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they use that term all the time, and they do that to be very, very negative. There are a few people in the country who say, well, that's good. I sort of like that term. I don't particularly like the term because I don't think I'm an isolationist at all, because along with the advice of not getting involved in entangling alliances and in the internal affairs of other countries, the founders, and it's permissible under the Constitution, is to be friends with people and trade with people and communicate with them and get along with them, but stay out of the military alliances. The irony of all this is they accuse us who would like to be less interventionist and keep our troops at home as being isolationists, and yet if you look at the results of the policy of the last 6 years, we find out that we're more isolated than ever before. So I claim the policy of those who charge us with being isolationists are really diplomatic isolationists. They're not willing to talk to Syria. They're not willing to talk to Iran. They're not willing to trade with people that might have questionable people in charge. And we have literally isolated ourselves. We have less friends and more enemies than ever before. So in a way, it's one of the unintended consequences of their charges. They are the true isolationists, I believe.
The original term for it back in the 18th century was independence, right?
That's right, and that's a much better term, but they don't want to use that. They want to, it really probably came out in World War I and World War II when there was a drumbeat to get involved in wars even then that were unnecessary, so they had to paint those who didn't want to go as being somewhat unpatriotic and isolationist and not caring about the world.
Okay, well, I'd like to get your criticism of the Bush doctrine as it stands. Its three main sections: preemption of threats before they occur in order to prevent catastrophes like happened on September 11th, unilateralism and doing what America thinks is right regardless of international opinion and the United Nations, and then third, obviously, being regime change and deciding who's fit to run other people's countries.
Right, and of those three, the one that I talk about the most and I think is the most dangerous is preemption. We've been involved much more so than we should have been for many, many years. Even before World War I, for over 100 years, we've been doing way too much. Our CIA's been involved on numerous occasions, even in the 50s, getting involved with overthrowing the elected leaders in Iran. But today it's much more blatant, and it's not sort of backdoor stuff. It's not sneaky. It's not using the CIA secretly to get us involved when we shouldn't be. It's a blatant, open, declared policy. Well, if we think it's in our best interest and we don't like them, we should go and start the war. That's what a preemption is all about. And we have never been so bold as to say we should start wars, and at least we pretended that we weren't involved in starting wars. So I think that is the most significant and most dangerous change in our foreign policy. I think unilateralism is a tricky term because in some ways, militarily, I'd just as soon be unilateralist. But I think that if you were unilateralist in your military, but you were willing to talk with people and be friends with them, it would be a more natural internationalism. Of course, that would require an international sound commodity standard of money, such as gold or silver, which would allow much more conducive trade with everybody. But going it alone at the same time, bragging about being the powerhouse and that if you don't listen to us, we can take you on, I think is very, very dangerous. The other one is very tempting, and that is a lot of American people succumb to the temptation of saying, well, when you really have a bad guy, we have to get rid of him because he might become worse. So they get tempted and they support this idea, well, we got to get rid of a Saddam Hussein or an Ahmadinejad without seriously thinking that through, because in some ways I think it's a disaster. Here Bush says, well, you know, it boiled down to, well, we got rid of this really, really bad guy. We got rid of Saddam Hussein and that means it was worth it. That means Saddam Hussein's, that one person was worth 3,200 American deaths and 25,000 casualties. I don't think the guy was worth that much. He wasn't going to attack us, so I think he put way too much value on a Saddam Hussein, insisting that we have to have regime change. And when we know that a certain regime is powerful enough that it might do some harm to us, all of a sudden this noble goal of getting rid of bad guys doesn't exist. So we didn't go after Stalin, and we didn't go after Mao Zedong in China and Pol Pot. We just let them be. And of course, even today, we deal with a lot of bad people. So that is just a pretense for the American people. Once we say, well, we got to rile the people up to go get rid of Saddam Hussein, where in reality they're probably thinking more about the oil than they are about Saddam Hussein.
Now, September 11th did reveal an actual threat to the lives of American civilians that must be faced one way or another. So I wonder if I can get you to address the war on terror, specifically, if possible, in the context of your being a conservative Christian Texas Republican, and whether you think September 11th heralded the clash of civilizations and a real long-term struggle that America needs to win victoriously, or whether you think this is the kind of thing that could be settled by other means.
Well, I think there is a pretty significant clash, but I think very few people in America understand it because they've been told so many lies about why they want to attack us here and why we have to go over there and fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. I think that is so misleading. But I think the whole mess in the Middle East started many, many years ago, hundreds, if not 1,000 years ago, where the fighting was going on between Christians and Jews and Sunnis and Shiites and Persians, and it's just been going on forever. But in recent years, I see this as a civil war within the Muslim world, the Shiites and the Sunnis, and we'd prop up Sunni governments around the world and incense those Shiites who then would like to attack us. So the war on terrorism is real, and there is a clash, but I think we would be out of danger if we would have never imposed our will on them by going over there and being in their face. I happen to believe most everything that Osama bin Laden wrote about why they attacked us, and it was nothing more than blowback for our policies over there, having bases on Holy Land, and I think we would be a lot better off if we just had a more neutral policy, and the war on terrorism probably would fade. Zawahiri has been reported as writing in an email that he hopes and prays that we don't leave Iraq because it is a very good thing for them to rally their troops and motivate their fighters and recruit suicide bombers. And if all of a sudden we would leave, it would be very detrimental to their policy. I believe that is the case. I'd like to hurt their policy by leaving.